Episode 1. Napoleon Bonaparte. A man born to define Europe and French history for decades. A military prodigy who would go from success to success. And a leader who would inspire feelings within his soldiers that would carry them above challenge after challenge, rising against odds in a European continent that was rampant with conflicts. In this audio podcast, we will explore Napoleon's life, including episodes in his military career, and follow him as he rose up the military ranks, inspiring confidence in his abilities. We will also explore parts of his personal life, looking into some of the personal drivers that he had and where they would be derived from. His family life, his personal experiences, and his highs and lows. Napoleon would occupy several positions in his lifetime. At one time being a French military leader, deciding and leading the French forces from the front, directing daring escapades and missions that would move him inchingly closer to the goals that he had set. At other times he would wear the cap of political leader, espousing ideas that he believed in and going toe-to-toe with opposing thoughts, orchestrating maneuvers as complex as those on the battlefield. His life would be defined by the times in which he would be born into. He was born in 1769, in Corsica, and important events that would turn the course of his life would include those like the French Revolution. 1769 would see several important episodes take place in the world of Corsica. His early years would consist of several instances in which he would move, initially from the island of Corsica to the French mainland, and then from school to school. Some of his childhood experiences would shape the man he would become, including scenarios in which the young Napoleon would be mocked for his accent, height, and other aspects. But at times, flashes of the man that he would become would flash through in several insightful moments. His education at École Militaire would come to a conclusion around 1785. And afterwards some of the regions Napoleon would be deployed to would include Valence and Auxonne as well as others. During this period, issues were rising that surrounded Corsica and its relation to the French mainland. Napoleon would be drawn into the conflicts, in opposition to Paoli, a man who had occupied a role in the life of both Napoleon and his father. A proponent of Corsican independence, he would in several occurrences come to be at opposite sides to Napoleon. He would want Corsica to secede. Paoli had led a life that had seen many incidents take place. By and by, he would find himself exiled to Britain. In the future, he would find himself involved in episodes that would have ramifications for him. An expedition to Sardinia in which Napoleon was also involved. Some other point in time would also see Corsica under the direction of some of his supporters. Paoli had been born around 1725 and would live a relatively long life, seeing him wear several roles that included those of the military leader as well as statesman, and an involvement in the general diet of the people of Corsica. He had come to interact with the Napoleon family several times, though some souring of the relationship would occur at some point in the timeline and would happen around the period that he would be exiled to England. He had been born into a family in which he wouldn't be the only son. His father had been tangled in the Corsican nationalist movement. Several issues had surrounded the Genoan government in control of Corsica at the time, and a rebellion would find itself stirring up in the year 1729. His father would go into exile. Along with him would be at least one of his sons, Pasquale. Pasquale would see himself involved in several events during this period. He would eventually find himself as General-in-Chief of Corsica, commander of all resistance. Several other events would occur in the wake of this one, and would include a constitution and other events. The Treaty of Versailles that would find itself occurring in May of 1768 would have an influence on Corsica, leading to some changes. A guerrilla war would result at some point, and other events would see the Battle of Ponte Novo take place, which would have several consequences. Paoli would find himself in England after some of these events, where many other occurrences would occur. Included in them was his meeting with numerous individuals who would continue to play a part in his life. Changes would occur that would allow Paoli to return home. During his time at home, he would find himself become the president and would implement many changes within the Republic. Other events that would occur during this period would include the War of the Austrian Succession. 1793. Events would occur that would improve Napoleon's standing with individuals like Augustin Robespierre. For one, Napoleon would be involved in events that would surround the port of Toulon and attempts to regain it. He occupied the position of artillery commander of the Republican forces. They had been tasked with the task of Toulon. He made changes that would lead to the success of the attempt. Bonaparte would also find himself involved in an event that would have a bearing for Paoli, the French expedition to Sardinia. By the end of events, Corsica would be controlled by Paoli's supporters. Several promotions would follow Napoleon, however. One of them would see him become artillery commander of the Army of Italy, his plans proving effective and granting him success. Other events would include those that would have a bearing on Napoleon's position within France. The fall of a political leader, Maximilien Robespierre, would transpire at some point in time, in the year 1794. With it, several other events would occur that would have a wide impression on history and on the lives of several individuals. Amongst those impacted would be Napoleon himself. He would suffer some personal repercussions, but by the end of it he would be found again in a position where his plans were to be needed. 1793. Siege of Toulon 1793. A battle that would play a large role in creating the reputation of Napoleon and would also see the destruction of several ships, as well as the participation of several personalities amongst whom were the likes of Sir Sidney Smith, Samuel Hood, and Charles O'Hara, the last one of whom would be caught. Events would eventually see the entry of convention troops into Toulon around mid to late December. 1793 would see the siege of Toulon occur. It would see the participation of soldiers of the French Republic, royalist rebels, and soldiers from Anglo-Spanish troops in a tactical and strategized struggle that would take place over the course of months, involve several casualties, and involve many backs and forths in a battle that would have significant repercussions. Strategies and plans would also emerge over the course of the battles as circumstances changed, positions and strategic points were gained, men were captured, and negotiations were opened and new batteries were built. After a period of time, the French would launch an attack on Little Gibraltar and would gain new positions. But this progress would not be without cost for the French. The outcomes that would come from the siege of Toulon would be important for several reasons. Not least of all was the strategic importance that the port of Toulon played, as well as the ships that had been present there and that would eventually find themselves being wrecked and destroyed. Prior to the events that had happened, several occurrences had taken place, including the arrest of several individuals that would lead to unrest that would occur across several French cities. Toulon would see several activities occur in it. With the Jacobin Club evicted, the rise of the Royalists, and the arrival of troops in support from the Anglo-Spanish fleet, which would see the contribution of a man known as Baron Xavier Lebret-D'Imbert, and British and Spanish admirals, including Sir Samuel Hood. Several episodes would occur which would lead to the rising of the French royal flag. Amidst some of these events, the fort would be handed over to the British Navy and conflict over the port with all its importance would come about and would see the involvement of many individuals from many different places and with numerous agendas come about. Into this situation with many elevated tensions and with many things riding on it would enter the French Republicans along with several notable individuals. Amongst them would be Jean-François Cardos, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Jean-François Cornu de la Poype. In the course of the episodes that would occur, Napoleon would be involved in several instances, including those that would see the French build several batteries that were there to challenge those that were in possession and in use by the British. The incident would also see him play a role in some of the attacks which would sooner or later see him injured at a point in time. Several other individuals would also play a part or role in the happenings that would unfold over the course of the siege. Many events would occur which would call for changes in strategy when things went wrong for one side. It even saw changes in personnel over the course of the siege. The eventual result of the event would be French Republican victory, but many other actions would occur during the course of it. We will take some time to discover a bit of the events of the battle as well as their importance to the overall wars, and how they would come to play a part in the overall outcomes of the siege. To add to this, we will explore the role that Napoleon would come to play in the period. Toulon would be a significant region for several reasons, including its ships. It would be particularly important for the Republicans in some of what they aimed to achieve. By the end of the events that would occur in the episode prior to the siege, Toulon would raise the royal flag. It is thus how we arrive at proceedings that would occur during the siege, and would see the reaction of the Republic to the events, as well as the involvement of Napoleon. Toulon would see the arrival of several troops, amongst whom were the troops under leaders like Jean-François Cornu de la Poype. On the British side, the batteries that were there were Fort Mulgrave, St. Philippe, St. Come and Saint-Charles, and they would collectively be called Little Gibraltar. The French, on the other hand, initially had the mountain, but with time and the labors of the French, amongst who would be Napoleon, playing an important part and an active role in events, some more batteries would be added to it, including those called Sans-Culottes, Jacobin, Men Without Fear, and Chassé-Coquin. The present Bonaparte would make moves to acquire more equipment. This would be assisted by supplies and additional men from the surrounding population, which was in part a result of the influence of some of Bonaparte's friends. Another event that would occur would be the sending of a letter of appeal to the Committee of Public Safety by Napoleon, in which he asked for help. He would spend some time planning and coming up with ideas, some of which would involve actions that were designed to reduce and block some of the supplies for Toulon, as usually occurred in a siege. In addition to some of the actions that Bonaparte had undertaken above, he would also find himself playing an active part in the fighting, being injured at a later point. Events would see the replacement of Cardos by François-Amédée Dapet, but he would in turn be replaced by Dugommier, a man who had been active within the French army for years and who had been born in 1738. In his career, he would find himself associated with naval batteries at least one point in time. Under him, several batteries would be added and constructed and conflicts would continue. At a point in time, the Anglo-Neapolitans would be able to attack, taking a battery. A counterattack from Bonaparte's side would follow. During some of these events, a British general would be captured. He would go by the name of General Charles O'Hara, and his capture would lead or at least contribute to several events amongst which were negotiations. The Republicans would attack in December, during the night, leading to the capture of several positions. But in the fighting, Bonaparte would be injured. Evacuation would be the decision of the Allies, which would also involve a decision to take steps in order to destroy ships that were present. These ships had so much importance to the French, for without it, their challenge of British naval power would be at least weakened. The French knew the importance of this. Events would see the connection of several individuals, amongst who were people the likes of Longara, Charles O'Hara and Smith. Though some challenges would be encountered during some of the events, at some point in time, the ship HMS Vulcan would be utilized as a fireship as it was set alight. Other ships that would be targeted during this period would include a ship that had been previously captured, as well as some French ships that found themselves present there during the events that occurred. Amongst some of the ships would be the Montreal. Some of the ships of the British side that would be present and would play somewhat of an active part in the episode would include the Britannia and the Union. The period would see several casualties in an incident that would see shots fired and structures and buildings set to the flame. And at one point in time, the Iris would explode. In the events surrounding it, several persons would lose their lives on the ship, Union. Also present during some of these events would be Republican prisoners. They would play an active role in the unfolding events. Forces against the Republicans would at some point in time turn their focus towards the old arsenal, aiming to set ships within it also aflame. However, they would be stopped by several factors, including the presence of the Republican forces. Smith, who was present at the event, would at some point in time decide to evacuate. During some of these actions, several individuals would be able to leave and evacuate from Toulon. Numerous changes would transpire in the aftermath of the siege of Toulon, including Napoleon's departure to take up a new role. Italian Campaign 1795 saw Napoleon's involvement in an unsuccessful attempt to reclaim Corsica, and a deployment to the Army of the West. It saw Napoleon's refusal to go, which would lead to some consequences for him. He would eventually find himself doing tasks and working in the Bureau of Topography. The period would also see his application for transfer to Constantinople. October would see rebellion against the National Convention, which would be a busy incident and would see several events take place during its course. Some of it concerning individuals the like of Paul Barras, and locations like the Tuileries Palace. Napoleon would participate in the defense of the convention, and his previous experience would play a role in the decisions he would make. Casualties would arise because of the revolt and the events that had surrounded it. Success in defending the Directory would have positive after effects for Napoleon. He would find himself being made commander of the Army of the Interior. 1796. January of that year saw him become head of the Army of Italy. His personal life would see him become married to Josephine de Beauharnais, a marriage that would go on for some time before eventually being annulled in 1810. Josephine would occupy a starring role in the life of Napoleon and would be present during many of the tumultuous events in his life. She would occupy the role of Empress of France over some period. She had had some children through her first marriage to a man by the name of Beauharnais. Many events would occur throughout her life, and many of them would have an impact on Napoleon. Sometimes these impacts would be positive, and at other times, they would be negative. The year would also see the Kingdom of Sardinia attacked. The Montanati campaign would also arise, and would start around 10th of April. Mantua would be placed to siege. Battles Napoleon would win during this time would include the Battle of Castiglione and the Battle of Bassano, both battles having involved the Austrians. 1797. The Battle of Rivoli would be a battle that would occur in the year 1797 and would find the French emerge with a triumph. It had befallen in the Republic of Venice and had seen the contribution of several people. Amongst some of them would be individuals like Napoleon, Barthélemy Joubert, Louis-Alexandre Berthier, Honoré Villèle, as well as individuals the likes of Peter von Kwodanovich. The battles would also see the involvement of Joseph Albinski. Other events that would be occurring roughly around this time would include a siege on Mantua. This event would have a bearing on the events at the Battle of Rivoli. And as with other battles that would occur in the future, quite a few attributes of Napoleon would be on the show in this one, as he would come to overcome a numerically superior army that had been set against him. The events that would occur during the episode would not end here, and would continue to have an impact on others that would occur later in the year. Several locations would also find themselves relevant in the events that would follow, like the Chapel of San Marco amongst others. The army of Austria would lose several of its soldiers in these exchanges. France would gain ground in Austria, and seeing the direction events were occurring in, the Peace of Leoben would ensue. Under these agreements, several changes were meant to occur, including those in territory, particularly involving the Republic of Venice. Several other incidents would occur throughout this year, including the coup of 18 Fructidor and the Treaty of Campo Formio. Eventually affairs would see Bonaparte enter Paris. Other events had occurred that would have a bearing on the future of the French nation, on Napoleon, and on the future of many others. Amidst these events, the influence that Napoleon yielded somewhat increased. Moves were made in the interval that had a bearing on Britain's naval strength and position and their economic interests. And plans would be made for an invasion of Britain, but these plans would not be realized. 1798 saw a French expedition to Egypt, an event that would be a part of the moves made that affected Britain's interest. Involved in Napoleon's plans would be a man known as Tipu Sultan. Other battles would follow, like the Battle of Shabrakit and the Battle of the Pyramids. The Battle of the Nile would see the contribution of Sir Horatio Nelson, and would take place in the year 1798. Numerous episodes would take place over the course of events, and some of the results would directly result in the demolition of some ships, including some frigates. Numerous casualties would also be incurred in the battle. 1799 would see several events that would involve several regions and territories, amongst which would be the towns of Arish and Haifa. These would be conquered by the French. They occurred amidst some dealings that would have adverse effects on the French. Other events would ensue over the course of a year that would also see episodes like the return of Napoleon and a change in the political situation of the Directory. November 1799 would have many events occur in it, some of them concerning Napoleon, who would find himself as a provisional consul along with two others, in a period that had also seen the dissolution of the Directory. Two other individuals in the form of CIs and ducos would also be provisional consuls. Several things were to change in the period that followed. A constitution called the Constitution of the Year 8 would be implemented. Napoleon was made first consul. Cambyses was made the second, and Charles-François Lebrun the third. A legislative body would be introduced. Amongst these changes were modifications that would see more power lie with Napoleon and would make an impression on future events. We will end the first episode of the first video into Napoleon and the Napoleonic Wars here. Thank you for listening to this episode. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe for more videos and to listen to any other updates that might come.